In this video, I review the Rumble pedal motors from Sim3D, show you how to fit them, and give you a quick start guide on how to set up haptic feedback with the customizably complex SimHub, and along the way I will show you just how much fun these Rumble motors can really be, and all this from an older gamer's perspective. Your rig doesn't move unless you are lucky enough to own a motion rig, but lacking any motion, sim racers have to do without inertia, g-forces, or any of that other drive by the seat of your pants stuff that we get used to when driving for real. However, motion can be implied through haptic feedback, which for most racers is experienced via their racing wheel. In my case, the detailed translation of every bump in the track that I get from my Moza R9 direct drive wheelbase. But I find the lack of any feedback through my pedals a tad disjointing, and eventually I ordered a set of Rumble motors tailored to fit my Thrustmaster T-LCM load cell pedals. These are made by Sim3D, a small company in the UK that produces a one-stop solution for sim racers who need a relatively cheap and easy to fit haptic feedback system. And about 6 weeks after I ordered them, they finally arrived. There are multiple videos on this subject, so I'm going to slant this video towards being a quick start guide for iRacing and SimHub users, and keep it as brief as possible on the assumption that you just want to get up and running with your new toys as quickly as possible. So to that end, these time codes displayed now are for iRacers who already have the Rumble motors and just want to skip to a specific section dealing with setting up road racing, open wheel and oval racing with the Rumble motors and SimHub. So skip as you see fit. I will not be offended.
That really hurt.
Fitting the Rumble motors to the T-LCM. I ordered a 2-motor kit from Sim3D which came with custom mounts for the T-LCM pedals, although plenty of other mounts are available. This version of the Rumble motors comes with 2 motors per mount, so you have one on the left and one on the right, and it basically has just this off-center weight that spins. That's what causes the vibration. That can be a bit noisy. But they are very powerful, and you will probably end up turning down their power in the settings. It also comes with a control box, a PSU, and even a 3-meter USB lead. It's the complete bundle. They even supply replacement screws to attach the motors to the pedal set. Software needed to interface my computer with the control box is not included, and this is something I will deal with in a later section of the video. To fit the Rumble motors, I first needed to remove the metal foot plates, which are secured by 2 screws, and also the rubber spacers behind the foot plates. If you use the larger spacers that come with the T-LCM pedals, you will probably be disappointed to learn that you can't use them. The Rumble motors from Sim3D are fitted with their own 3D custom mounts, which are about the same width as the standard T-LCM spacers, and that is what you will have to use. With the foot plates and the rubber mounts removed, I could fit the Rumble motors and then secure the foot plate again using the screws supplied by Sim3D. The whole assembly just slips into place and is very easy to fit. There is no technical ability needed here at all. If you can tie your shoelaces unaided, you should be good to go. The only sticking point for me was the supply screws were approximately the right size, but only just, and I had to work really hard to get the screw to actually catch on the threaded area inside the pedal. The original screws are too long. They can't be used again because they would interfere with the motor that now sits at the back of your pedal, so don't try and put them back in again. It won't work. Still, even with that minor problem, I found the process fairly easy. Probably would have been easier if I had removed the pedals first from the base plate, but honestly, who can be asked with that sort of grief?
Dedicated.
Cabling up the motors to the control box. Once the motors are fitted, I could add the control box, which is a simple black cased affair with 4 inputs on one side and the USB and PSU sockets on the other side. It really is about as simple as it can get, but does appear to be a well-made piece of kit. The cables that attach from motor to control box are braided, which is a nice touch, and will probably feed through any type of cable management system you decide to use. My only worry is the very thin wires that attach from the cable to the motor itself. The box itself I placed behind the pedals on the floor, but if this is untidy for you, you could easily Velcro it to the tray or put it somewhere else. Once the power and the USB cables were connected, I could see a red light glowing softly inside the control box. This is now the point where you can actually begin to configure the motors. However, these Rumble motors will not work with LFE output of iRacing, so you do need some kind of third-party software to get the pedals to actually work. Connecting the Rumble motors to SimHub. SimHub is a multi-talented piece of software to control haptic feedback displays and probably a lot more. It can be downloaded for free and I will put the link below, but if you want to support the software and gain access to some of the more advanced features in the software, you need to donate a small amount of money to the developers, which does seem very fair considering the flexibility of the software you get and the support it gives to a vast range of sim racing titles. The paid version can also be set to automatically recognize the sim you are using and also has other higher level functions enabled. So with the control box plugged into the PSU and the USB cable connected to the computer, launch SimHub and connect to the control box by going to the Arduino section on the left of the menu. Once in here, click on My Hardware, the last tab on the right. If you're doing this for the first time, you will probably see a message asking if this is a single or multiple Arduino setup. For the kit I bought, I need the single Arduino option. SimHub will scan the US ports for the control box, and as you can see here, it's recognized mine as a Sim3D Rumble and Wind kit with the motors seen here. If you don't see this and it won't connect, contact Sim3D and ask for advice via their Discord. With the control box connected, I can now test the motors by clicking on the Shake It Motors section on the left and then clicking on the Motors Output tab here in the middle. Here you can see the Arduino Motors section, which you can activate by toggling it on here if it is not already on. With that done, click on the little down arrow to open this section and test the motors by clicking on the Test button. Be warned, this test does let out a rather fierce buzz. As I mentioned earlier, it is advisable at this stage to work out which sockets belong to which channel. There are 4 sockets on my control box, so I tested these one by one to figure out which sockets belong to which channel. Don't assume they follow a logical progression. On mine, they did not. On my unit, these are ports for channels 1 and 2, and these are for channels 3 and 4. With that done, it's finally time to set up the haptic feedback for both pedals.
Wow, now I am excited.
Setting up haptic feedback for iRacing using SimHub. To get started, you need to create a profile in SimHub. If you already have one, you can use the clone profile options. If not, in SimHub, go to the Shake It Motors page and the Effects Profile tab. For your first profile, you need to click on the Profile Manager button at the top of the window to view the available properties screen. Click on New Profile in the bottom left to bring up the Properties screen and select iRacing using the drop-down menu. Ignore the car model as this is optional, and then give the profile a name. Let's type in Road Racing, as this will be the first set of effects I will share with you. You may also want to add a version number. I have the profile content all toggled off, and I slide the automatic calibration tool to the far left to deactivate it, but you can leave it on if you prefer. Add a description if you want, then click on OK. Select the profile you just created. I have automatic profiling switched off, but you can turn this on if you prefer, and click Load. You will probably see a screen asking you to activate effects. You can do this by clicking the Add Effect button and then add the effects that you want. This can only be done one at a time. You can't select multiple effects. So add one, then repeat until complete. Click on the motor's output and take a moment to rename the channels if you want by just clicking in the text field at the top and entering whatever name you desire. Now assign each effect to the pedal motor you want to be activated for that effect. You may need to scroll down to see all of these settings. For mine, I have ABS on the brake pedal only, with wheels lock also on the brake pedal only. For the accelerator only, I have gear shift, traction loss and wheel slip. Again, remember with haptic feedback, less is more. Too much will turn your pedal set into a foot massage machine. Pause the video now if you want to take a screenshot of this or write them down. Return now to the Effects Profile tab. The slider here on the upper right controls the global gain for all effects. So I prefer to leave this at 100% and adjust the gain of each individual effect. Here you can see mine are set to 60% for traction loss, wheel slip and wheels lock, and ABS is at 35% and gear shift at 50%. You can increase or decrease these to suit your own setup. If you add an effect that's not supported by the sim you are using, it will appear here with a red icon next to the name, as shown here. You can either remove this effect by clicking here on the trash can, or you can just toggle it off for now using this switch, just in case you find a sim that does support that effect. Now you are ready finally to adjust the settings. To do this, go to the Effects Profile tab if it's not already open, and open one of the effects. I'm going to share my own personal settings for iRacing using road racing, open wheel and oval cars. And while I won't pretend to be an expert with SimHub, I can tell you these settings are based on watching a lot of videos on SimHub settings. These are my own preferred settings that I find to work for me personally in iRacing. However, these settings should be regarded as a suggested starting point, and you will need to test and tweak them to your own personal taste. So that being said, I'll start with the settings for road racing cars and dial open the settings one at a time. Don't worry too much about what these settings are or what they actually do. I will explain that in the next section. This is just to get you up and running so you have a feeling for what you do need to change. Right, on with the first profile, which is road racing. Here are the settings. This is traction loss, wheels lock. Note that wheels lock has the added setting of a trigger, which I have set to only activate once the brake pedal is pressed at least 10%. Wheel slip. You can see here the message about wheel slip telemetry not being outputted by iRacing. Also, this has the option of not activating the effect until the throttle reaches 10%. ABS and gear shift. As you alter these settings, the profile you created will be automatically updated, so you don't need to save it. And there you go. That's it. You are now ready to road race with haptic feedback coming from your pedals. But before you do that, let's set up two more profiles. Firstly, for open wheel cars. You can create a second profile and save some time by cloning the road racing profile. Do this by clicking Clone Profile. Make sure iRacing is the selected sim, then change the profile name to Open Wheel Racing. Delete the word copy, and at the end, click OK. Your road racing settings are now safe, and any changes you make to this profile will only update the open wheel profile. For open wheel cars, it's a similar setup, but with some important tweaks. Again, use pause to view these. This is traction loss, wheels lock, wheels slip, ABS I have off for open wheel, but gear shift is set like this. Now let's repeat this process for cloning a profile to create an oval racing profile. Again, clone the setup, rename it, make sure iRacing is set, and then when you've clicked on OK, you can begin to enter the settings. Traction loss I have set like this, wheels lock, this, wheels slip, ABS, again for oval this is off, and gear shift I have set a little higher like this. With all of these now set, you can now begin to test and tweak these settings. However, before you do that, take a moment to watch the next section, which will give you a brief overview on what these settings actually do, which is something you will need to know before you start altering them.
Okay, I understand.
A brief tour of response filters found inside SimHub. Okay, with the effects enabled, you can now fine-tune each one using what's called response filters, which tailor each effect to your own personal preferences. But before you can get into this part of your haptic feedback journey, and believe me, it will be a long one, you need to have some small understanding of what the somewhat complex set of sliders available to you inside the response filters actually do. Here I am opening the traction loss effect so I can review the response filters. The response filters do pretty much what the label says by using various sliders to filter how each effect responds, which in turn controls the level of haptic feedback you will feel through the motors. Each effect can have a different set of adjustment tools depending on the effect, so don't expect them to all look the same. Here is the response curve that I have set up for traction loss. This is a graphical indication of what sort of output you will get and is controlled by the sliders gamma factor, threshold minimum force, and input gain. In this case, once the initial threshold has been exceeded within traction loss, I would see a sharp response with a minimum force of 50 cutting in pretty quickly to the maximum. This setup gives me a soft buzzing if I begin to approach traction loss, getting more intense as that threshold to complete traction loss is approached. Some may find this a bit much, but I like an earlier warning rather than a later one. The effects controlling this are gamma, which makes smaller effects quieter at values of less than 1 or louder at values of more than 1. Threshold, which is used to mute effects until they reach the value you have set. This helps to just get the feedback you want when you want it and is a way to limit an effect kicking in too early. Minimum force boosts the output when the signal is greater than 0 and allows you to, say, have the traction loss kick in at 50% from the get-go. This is useful, otherwise the effect can be too subtle to discern from other haptic feedbacks and take too long for you to detect it. And finally, input gain is a way of either amplifying the amount of signal or reducing the signal. For me, on my system, I had to ramp this up to get a feeling for it, but it does make the system a bit loud. So be aware that each setting comes with its own consequences. So with that all sort of explained, I think you now have a fundamental grip of what you need to change and how you need to change it, or maybe you're just confused. That's how I was when I first started playing with SimHub. The way to get to the grips with this software is really just to play with it. Experiment, see what works, see what doesn't. Push things to the max, reduce them to the minimum. Find out what does what. That's really the way to do it. And once you've figured it out, you can dial in the settings as you want. Start with mine though and tweak them, because mine do work, and you will find that it's a solid base with which you can move forward. Testing and evaluating your settings in SimHub. Before you start testing in iRacing, here's a quick tip to speeding up your calibration process in VR using the Quest 2 or 3. I'm afraid I don't know how this works on other headsets. Perhaps someone could comment below if they do know. First, you need to have SimHub displayed on your monitor, not minimized in the task tray. This can then be loaded into a virtual window by connecting the Quest to your PC in the usual way. I have created a video on this if you're not sure how to do that, link below. And then when you enter the grey void, use the Quest control bar to access a selection of virtual windows available to you using this little plus symbol here on the far right. You may need to scroll the bar over if you can't see it. When you click on the little plus sign, a whole load of options will appear. Choose SimHub from the list. If you don't see it, make sure you haven't accidentally closed or minimized SimHub. Once you click on SimHub from the list, a version will appear inside the void in its own virtual window. Drag the virtual window to one side using the Quest controller, then finally click on this little pin icon at the bottom of the screen to pin it to your VR display. If you don't do this, the window will vanish when you enter iRacing. Now click on the little monitor button to access your PC, open the iRacing UI if it's not already there, and select Test from the top. Choose a track and a car. In this case, I'm at Brands Hatch in the MX-5. Enter the car and you should still be able to see SimHub in your view. Interact with it by clicking the mouse inside the virtual window. You may sometimes have to click on the far side of the virtual window to gain access to it, and you may have to click back again in the center of the screen to regain control of the car and the sim, but you will soon get the hang of swapping between these. And it's a lot quicker than keep jumping backwards and forwards between virtual and flat screen. Now, for the testing. You should disable all the effects except the one you want to tweak. This is very important. If you go around with them all ablaze, you probably won't get very far. In this case, I am closing down or turning off all but the traction loss effect. So that's the one I'm working on, traction loss. And then I open the traction loss so I can see the response filter settings. Here I can drive around and note the feedback I'm getting and then make changes as I see fit. Another test drive, see how those go. So on and so on. When I'm happy with that effect, I'll turn it off, enable another, wheels lock for example, and then test that. Be aware though that some effects are often best tested in tandem, such as wheel slip and traction loss, or ABS indicator and wheels lock. And then you just keep going, and you finally update the profile. And if you want to update this in the future, don't forget to clone a copy of this profile so you can go back to the original if it all goes wrong. And finally, one word of important advice. Even though it's now very easy to change the effects, don't be the sim racer that spends forever tweaking and never racing.
Oh, I've wasted my life.
Conclusions. The first thing I want to reiterate about the Rumble motors from Sim3D is that they are huge amounts of fun. Real ear-to-ear grin type of stuff. I am not sure if they will ever make me a better or faster driver, but if I took them off right now, I would miss them straight away. That's not to say they are the perfect sim racer dream add-on. Whilst they are easy to fit, mechanically speaking, the setup time required to tweak SimHub into something that you find both useful and fun is not insignificant. However, with the settings that I have cobbled together from various YouTube videos, I now have several profiles for iRacing that gives me pretty much what I was looking for from haptic feedback, which is some sense of what the car is actually doing outside of the feedback I get from the Moza R9 direct drive wheel. One of the things that I love about these pedals is that I think I'm finally starting to get my mind behind how trail braking is actually supposed to work, and this is largely due to the haptic feedback I get from the Rumble motors informing me more about what the car is doing. Before, it was kind of guesswork, trying to figure out pedal strength and the effect it was having on the car. I mean, sure, the load cell pedals help enormously, but now, with the Rumble motors, when I go into the corners, I get this immediate tactile warning from both traction loss on the accelerator pedal motor and wheel slip and brake lock on the brake pedal motor, with the pedals grumbling quietly at me as I approach the threshold of braking and grip. And if I get too uncomfortably close to the threshold, the vibration increases sharply in intensity and noise, and I know that I have to back off or face the consequences. Driving in iRacing has become now, for me personally, a balancing act, with the haptic feedback from both pedals helping to keep me centered by alerting me to the dangers of spinning out or locking up, while still allowing me to push the car as hard as possible. It gives me that extra confidence to get closer to the edge, closer than I have ever got before, and all because I can now feel how near I am to going way too far. Effectively, the Rumble motors replace the sort of feedback that previously I could only get from listening to the iRacing audio of the tyres squealing as I rounded a bend, and also from the direct drive wheels starting to indicate when things were not going to plan. And by then, it was probably too late to do anything about it. There are many advantages to this system from Sim3D, but the whole concept of tactile feedback is boosted in my mind by the relatively cheap price tag offered for the whole kit. At about £120, it's a steal, it really is. The only downside I can see is that if you upgrade your pedals, these custom mounts will need to be replaced, and I'm not even sure that's possible. Also, if you do order a set, be prepared to wait a long time. I think mine arrived nearly a month later than it should. And finally, a disadvantage unique to anyone outside the UK is that this minor thing called Brexit has happened. You might have seen something about it on the news. And as a result, custom duties are now payable on items ordered from Sim3D if you live outside the UK. And this bumps the price up, at least for me personally, by another €27. Still great value for money in my book, but something to be aware of. Other disadvantages are that you need a third-party bit of software to do anything at all with the Rumble motors. And while SimHub is really cool, it does cost extra. And it takes a lot of time and effort to get the profiles just right for your setup and your sim. Sadly, a lot of the information out there on the internet is old and outdated. The best profile starting point I found was in this recent video, and all of my profiles are based on what this YouTuber had to say on the subject. It is well worth watching this video, as he really does know his stuff, and I highly recommend you take a moment to view what he is saying. Lastly, I would say that if you're buying a set of Rumble motors because you think it's going to make you faster, you are probably going to be disappointed. Sure, it has the potential to make you a better sim driver by giving you yet another tool by which you can judge how well or badly you are driving your sim, but it is just a tool. It's not a magic wand. You will only get out of it what you put in, with time and effort developing the right profile for you and your rig and your favourite sim. And you will need to spend a fair amount of time practicing how the Rumble motors can actually help you. They are fun, they are helpful, but if you have driving issues, they may not be the silver bullet you are looking for. That being said, I still want to wholeheartedly recommend these Rumble motors, but I would warn people to go in with their eyes open. It is a pain to set them up in SimHub, and once you have them set correctly, you still won't necessarily become a champion-beating driver overnight. Possibly the other disadvantage, or advantage, depending on your point of view, is the low price point for these Rumble motors, which makes it feel like a gateway drug for haptic feedback. And once you get a taste of what is actually possible, you are likely to want much more. I know I do. A wind machine from Sim3D is definitely on my wish list, as is this thing. This video is admittedly not as ambitious as I wanted it to be, as I really wanted to show how to create profiles for other sims, not just iRacing. But sadly, time and keeping this video to a manageable length put an end to those aspirations. However, I do want to make a deeper dive video on SimHub at some point in the future, and in that video I hope to have profiles ready for other sim racing programs. If you have any suggestions on how I could improve my profiles in SimHub, please comment below, or join me for a more prolonged conversation at the Older Gamers Perspective Discord channel. You can find a link for that below. In the meantime, I hope you found this video helpful, and until the next one, race clean, and I'll see you on track. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click the like button, and if you haven't already done so, subscribe. Click the little bell icon if you want to be notified of any future videos.